All right, so we're back. Welcome to the Q&A portion of the stream. We've got our very special guest, Dr. Jeana Jorgensen of the Foxy Folklorist on Patheos, as well as numerous publications and places where you can read her work. But shout out to the blog, of course. We've got some questions. For you that the good old Folkwise sleuthing team has put together to ask you about you and your work. Also, uh, uh, feel free to send questions to our email, folkwise13@gmail.com, if you have more questions that you'd like Dr. Jeana to answer in the interview right now. Also, Daisy, did we make it so Nightbot you can go !Q &A and get a link to our Gmail in the chat?
I hope so.
Somebody
I'm
try
gonna
that.
test it.
Somebody try that.
Q. Hey.
Exclamation point! Exclamation point!
Oh my gosh! What am I doing? You'd think I did this before. Oh, nice.
There we go. There we go. There we go.
There you go.
You did it.
I will say though, our email is fullwise13@gmail.com as per Nightbot. We'd need one more thing,
Oh, my bad.
but that's okay.
Folkwise13. Oh man, Nightbot.
This is yet another thing to list to our technical errors. Yes, it is, Luomi. It's okay. This one is the correct one. I just posted.
Daisy, be in the chat and link it.
Nope, that's also not the correct
Yerky.
one.
Yeah, it's the Yerky. Get his ass. It's typo in the group chat. Okay.
Okay.
Let's. Jeana, we've got some questions for you. You ready to give us some answers?
Yes.
Cool. All right. So, you spoke a little bit about how you became a folklorist earlier. How did you come to make a name for yourself studying fairy tales? Like, what brought you to fairy tales?
Yeah, so I think I was a really avid reader from the time I was old enough to read. My mom likes to joke that I popped out of the womb with a book in each hand. And so like you do when you're a baby, I guess. And so I just loved reading, and I really loved reading fairy tales and world mythology, like anything I could get my hands on. I started reading fantasy and later on science fiction. And so I just always had this abiding love for these kinds of narratives. And I got to college and I was like, wait, you can study this? I'm in. And so I just was really hooked from the time I was either a freshman or a sophomore. Like I was all in. I got bit by the folklore bug.
Many of us have been bitten I think, in similar ways. That I think a lot of folklorist parents have a similar story.
Can I say I'm pretty sure the exact same thing that you just said, the oh, I can actually study this, is also part of my folklore discovery narrative.
Yeah, that's me with food.
Oh, I can spend time reading, studying this.
I think I had a book of saints legends that I never stopped reading when I was a little boy. Yeah, so Catholic. We talked a little bit about ATU when we were playing The Wolf Among Us. Can you, and you explained that a little bit. What are some of your favorite ATUs?
Well, I really like 510B. I wrote my master's thesis on it. So just the kind of weird, wait, there's a fairy tale about incest? Nobody really expects that. So I just find that one really fascinating. I also have a thing for tale type number 451, The Maiden Who Seeks Her Brothers. So if you're familiar with Hans Christian Andersen's The Wild Swans or the Grimm's The Six Swans, The Seven Ravens, or The 12 Brothers. So they included 3 versions of the same tale type in their collection, which is fascinating and strange. So I really like that one as well. Yeah, those are a couple of my favorites right now. And yeah, I like most of them. I like, kind of lesser known ones like ATU 706, The Maiden Without Hands, because in the Grimm's version, at least, her father makes a deal with the devil and like cuts off her hands, and she just kind of goes wandering and meets a king, and they get married. So it's a whole thing.
Is the maid without hands related to the girl with silver hands?
Yes, that is probably the same thing
Okay.
because she's given silver hands in the Grimm's version, but in other versions, her hands miraculously grow back because of like an angel or the Virgin Mary or what have you.
Huh. Um, this is kind of just following up to that, but um, why are different versions, or like what a folklorist would call like a formulaic variant, why is that important in like the kind of work specifically you do?
Oh, that's a great question. So when I think about what folklore is, I really like Lynn McNeil's definition in Folklore Rules that folklore is informally transmitted traditional culture. And because folklore is not institutionally passed down and reinforced, it's like there's no law that says you have to do folklore. Like, no one's forcing you to do Thanksgiving. And if you tell a joke the wrong way, there might be some social consequences, but you're not going to jail. So folklore only exists and persists when it's socially relevant to the people who are performing it and transmitting it. So to me, that's really the key that unlocks variation,
Mm.
because variation arises because it can. It's definitive of what folklore is. There's no like textbook version that you have to do. And because it shows that people are constantly reinventing folklore of all genres, from fairy tales to urban legends to customs to foodways, to suit their social circumstances.
Hey, you said that was a good question, but that was an even better answer. That someone, I hope someone was taking notes on that. That's going to be on the quiz. That's on the test at the end of the year. Um, So we played The Wolf Among Us, and we specifically I was given specific instructions to play the Big Bad Wolf as a good guy. But he kind of has like a redemption arc in the comics, which is like where that option to play the Big Bad Wolf, like good or bad, comes from in that game. And I think we the Folkwise research team also noticed that that was like a trend a lot of the times like the villain redemption arc, especially in like modern adaptations of traditional narratives and like more like recent media. Why do you think there is like some sort of trend that rehabilitates traditional or characters or villains from traditional narratives?
Yeah, I think part of that relates to how in a lot of these earlier source texts, we just don't get a lot of explanation for why the villains are the way they are. Like, why is Cinderella's stepmother such a bitch? We don't know. Like, and then we just kind of see like villainous behavior and a punishment. So in the Grimm's version of Cinderella, her stepsisters cut off parts of their toes and heels to try to fit into the shoe unsuccessfully. And then at Cinderella's wedding to the prince, birds peck their eyes out. So we just sort of see this kind of evil, transgressive behavior from villain characters, and then they're just punished. End of story. So I think there's a lot of curiosity about like what might motivate them, where are they coming from, what's going on in their life story. I mean, I think that Gregory Maguire's novel Wicked was one of the
Mhm.
forerunners of this, retelling the Wizard of Oz from the perspective of the Wicked Witch of the West. So I think that it probably ties into larger pop culture phenomena as well. Like, why do we get certain narratives at certain times? There's a lot of like the sort of grim, gritty, and dark stuff happening, like dark fantasy and Game of Thrones type stuff. So um, I did see a some speculation because I'm working on an article right now that's in somewhere in the process of being revised and resubmitted to a journal, about fairy tale torture porn, which is a
Oh.
genre of horror film, which I don't actually watch a lot of horror, but I was reading this novel, A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas, which is a Beauty and the Beast retelling. But like literally the heroine is tortured by the
Mm.
villain
Mm.
in an effort to disenchant her lover. Like literally tortured, like PTSD and all, like just really horrible stuff that she kind of unpacks and heals from in subsequent books. So I was really interested, like, where do you get this intersection of fairy tales and like explicit torture? And some of the scholarship on this particular kind of horror, torture porn, splatterpunk adjacent stuff, suggests that it's a kind of uniquely American genre that arose in response to 9/11,
Mhm.
that has things like explicit modes of surveillance and punishment, and there's nowhere safe, and it's happening in the real world, like as a kind of psychological, cultural processing response to all this. So I wonder if, in some ways, the desire to like get inside the head of the fairy tale villain and either understand them or maybe redeem them can be connected to like similar impulses.
Uh, as someone who watches a lot of uh, horror movies, you for someone who doesn't watch horror, described that genre perfectly. I just want to say. So you've done your reading. Also, thanks for the follow. I saw that pop up right at the end of the question, and I didn't want to not reply to Jeana and just go thanks for the follow. But everyone, yes, follows are good. We're at 40 right now. My next question,
can I
and this,
mention that's
I'm sorry, what Daisy?
can I mention that it's just 10 away from affiliate status
Oh, we'll
for
get
us.
we'll get there.
We're very
We'll get there
close.
later in the. We'll
get
talk
there.
about this later.
We'll get there.
All right,
I'll
back.
also say that like we're getting a ton of good questions. So just whenever you want to get chat questions going, I've got like I don't know 10.
Let's
choose.
let's get through some these, and let's maybe us.
Perfect.
Can you pick the broader chat questions, and then we can do that before?
I will.
Okay, we can do that like between now and the activity, as it were.
Perfect.
All right, this kind of goes along with the last question, Jeana. What is your favorite adaptation of a fairy tale? And either for teaching reasons or not teaching reasons, what's your favorite version?
Um, I really love Emma Donohue's book, Kissing the Witch. It is a collection of short stories that are all fairy tale retellings. But the thing that's really striking about it is that it's all a frame tale that's interwoven. So a frame tale is a story inside of a story. The frame tale is the outside story, like in the Arabian Nights or the Princess Bride or How I Met Your Mother. It's been around for millennia. It's such a common sort of narrative tool that we see in folk narrative as well as literary stuff, as well as pop culture stuff. So the really striking thing, narratologically speaking, about Kissing the Witch is that the first story is the tale of the shoe. So it's Cinderella.
Mm-hmm.
And I like it. The stories are very like feminist queer retelling, which of course I like. But at the end, after she's kind of gone to the ball and met the prince, and was like, eh. And then she kind of looks at the godmother for the first time and is like, oh, I like you. Like, maybe we should go home together. And then she asked the godmother, like, where did you come from before you showed up? Well, my story is the tale of the bird. And then you get that story. And then at the
Oh,
end of that story, there's another like, oh, well, who were you before you walked in here? Ah, well, that's the tale of the horse. So it's a series of interconnected frame tales, like Russian dolls almost, but I don't even know how to represent this visually. But it's just really striking, and I think it's a really lovely collection. So I like teaching it, but I also just like it.
that is a good answer. That sounds like a great one. And can you repeat the name for the chat too?
Yes, Kissing the Witch by Emma Donohue.
Excellent. Yeah, I was just laughing because the Arabian Nights, The Princess Bride, How I Met Your Mother, all stories with equally good and satisfying endings. Let's transition a little bit to a slightly different question, but something that you have studied and written about. Um, Sorry, I'm just happy I get to read this question. Um, how have memes about Joe Biden changed now that he is the president?
Well, I'm not formally conducting a study at this point, but I think that we see a continuation of Biden as a trickster figure, which I thought was the case in the 2016 election memes. He was basically playing Home Alone with the White House.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I think we're seeing a continuation of kind of this game of one-upsmanship and pranks and so on. Like occasionally in the 2016 memes, you would get like an occasional earnest, sort of honest moment of like Biden and Obama, bonding over something, having like a bro moment or whatever. So I think we do still see some of that earnestness of like, hey, let's not make things worse for people. But I really think that at least immediately post-election, or not post-election, but post-inauguration, the Biden memes were overshadowed by the Bernie memes.
Mm.
So I'd be really curious to see if anyone's collecting and so one thing I found striking about the Biden memes in 2016 and a bit of 2017 was the juxtaposition with pop culture. So there were ones portraying Biden as receiving the Medal of Honor. It's like, oh, it's the thing from the Titanic, or oh, it's chocolate, or oh, it's there were a lot of there were tie-ins to like Harry Potter, Star Wars, joking that Trump's wig was a Horcrux kind of a thing. So we saw a lot of Biden pop culture overlap, which my collaborator on the published paper, Linda Lee, and I analyzed as sort of wishful thinking from geeks and nerds who wanted to claim Biden as like one of us. He's one of ours. He's a guy in politics that we can kind of identify with, and now that's gone. So, but then I think the Bernie memes really kind of took that and ran with it because just the sort of iconic image of Bernie with the mittens became something that you could so easily insert into any visual context. So I think that became even more pop culture-ified in a lot of ways.
Yeah. No, it's good. That's a good answer. It expands upon the question and sets up a really interesting thesis that someone should check out.
There's a question in the chat that's like so directly relevant. I don't want to save it for later if we
Hit
don't
me.
have to. What do you think about the trickster Biden meme emoji?
There's an emoji?
I'm not sure, but there is a trickster Biden meme. This person added emoji on there too, but I think that just the trickster Biden.
Does
like,
that
what
mean?
Do you think of the trickster Biden?
Does that mean emote? Like, or should we get like Should we get like goofy Joe Biden faces? Whatever emotes. I do live right next to Delaware. I do live like right next to the Delaware border, so it's kind of hometown.
Either way, I think the question's more about the trickster Biden meme in general. Like, what's the hot take there?
Yeah. So that was sorry, I have to show this off because it's such a pretty cover. So in my and Linda Lee's chapter in the new folklore and social media book.
Yes.
So we do advance the argument that Biden is essentially not just like any old prankster like Home Alone style, but rather a trickster figure. And we line him up against the characteristics of certain mythological tricksters, such as Loki from Norse mythology, Coyote from Native American mythology, specifically Navajo, alongside some other tricksters. And we say that like kind of point by point, Biden is amoral, has a sort of a childish and sometimes scatological sense of humor, loves food. Tricksters are often very into food. So a lot of tricksters, especially I want to say Margaret Mills has done some studies of Afghani tricksters in their different folktale cycles. There's a lot of women tricksters there, and they are very much in control of the domestic sphere and kind of having their way, which, Biden pranking the White House to make it an inhospitable setting for incoming Trump administration is sort of along those lines too. There's also gender bend. Think of any number of Loki's exploits. And there are some where Biden. There's one where there's like the Sith Kermit the Frog meme, but it's Biden like tell Obama you're pregnant with his child kind of a thing. So we do see some gender bending. So yeah, point by point, I think that Biden fulfills a lot of the same functions as tricksters do on like a mythological level, but he's a pop culture meme and a figure in contemporary culture instead.
I'm just thinking that Biden's like stock like term of affection for men is Jack, and I can see Biden and Jack having like adventures in Appalachia together. As far as tricksters go, do you want to ask this next question, Daisy? Because it's from the chat, because it's also very appropriate.
Thinking about that, I was like debating whether
do it. No, do it. It's a direct follow-up. It's a direct follow-up.
Bubbly Like Soda, who is Chrissy Woodmere, another Folkwise team member, asks, seeing recent memes about Kamala Harris as a trickster, is that just the VP's role? Is the vice president's role to be the trickster? I guess is really the question here.
I haven't seen those memes, so I'm not sure if I can comment on them. But I mean, but
okay,
I
post them in the chat.
Send them to me later. I'm not looking at the chat while I'm on here. That's too much of what I do when I'm teaching over Zoom.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, I think there is something to be said that, like, yes, we do get tricksters as culture heroes, but they're not always the main figure in that mythology. Like, there's Loki, but also Odin and Thor and this whole, other pantheon going on. So, like, maybe the trickster shines in a supportive role.
It's a good answer. I believe
Yeah.
that for now, at least. Let's here. I'll ask. It sounds like we got a lot of good questions from the chat, Daisy. So I'll ask one more
We do.
question. I'll ask one more kind of big question to Jeana. Then you can supply some questions from the email and from the chat while I get stuff ready for the next segment. But I will ask you this. This is kind of a fun one, and I definitely am reminded to say it because I can like see your bar in the corner. But as anyone who has followed you on social media knows, you have a bit of a culinary streak, especially over the pandemic. And what is your favorite cocktail you've made recently? Your favorite thing you've pickled, and your favorite thing you've baked?
Okay. I wasn't expecting this question. Probably my favorite cocktail. So I infused vodka with beets from my farmer's market over the summer.
Ooh,
So
Stop, that sounds so good.
it sounds amazing.
it's
I
so,
love
you
beets.
literally cut them up and put them in vodka for 3 weeks. It's so easy. Anyway, so beet vodka with lime juice, and I think I made a simple syrup infused with rosemary. So that's one of my favorites. I haven't had it in a while, but I like that one.
Ooh, you have a name for
And
that? Do you have a name for that?
not yet. Help me think of a name.
It's got to be like the name has got to be like I think it's got to be like an ATU.
Oh.
But I don't know what ATU that works. Maybe something about like what, because that I bet it's like a beautiful color. Like it's a
I
beautiful.
want to say,
Yeah.
part of me is like,
Dude.
I don't like the
There's
rosy
gotta be-
sapling.
Okay, so like fun fact about the ATU index, it was created like to make sense numerically. So numbers 1 through 299 are animal tales or fables, like Aesop's fables type things. And numbers 300 through 749 are kind of proper fairy tales, Magic Quest, all the stuff. And then 800 through the thousands ish is more like we would call them like everyday folk tales, romantic tales, novella, things you'd find more like in the Decameron or Canterbury Tales, like more like ordinary peasants tricking people type things or royalty, but like a little less magic. Sometimes it depends. There's gotta be a folk tale in there about someone like, you cheated me out of my turnips or beets kind of a thing. Like there's gotta be one of those like everyday folk tales is like has root vegetables in it. So I will find that now. Favorite thing I've pickled. Are there suggestions in the chat?
The name suggestion we got from the chat is the blood of the rose. But I also bet that there is a like some kind of root vegetable medley somewhere there too. Anyway.
Amazing.
Yeah. Favorite thing I've pickled, this wasn't recently, it was over the summer. I canned it, I haven't eaten it yet. Garlic scapes. They make amazing pickles. They're almost like the consistency of green beans, but like highly garlicky. So that's my favorite pickle right now.
Interesting.
And then the favorite thing I baked, I just made some sourdough focaccia with garlic and rosemary. That's like, I just want to like, after this, I'm just going to go like eat it. It's really good.
Everything just sounds so savory.
House. Dang.
Yeah, I wish I could smell what was going on. Yeah.
I can't. Does your house just smell like rosemary?
A lot, yeah.
It's so good. Oh, I love that.
Daisy, can you queue up a couple questions before I get the game going?
Yeah. Why don't I ask you some of these like big, like easy questions that are kind of about like fairy tales as a big scope.
Great.
As a big genre.
Works for me.
Here's a good question. Is the coming of age story always a component of folk tales or in the formula? Is that always a part of folk tales? Is that something necessary to call something a fairy tale or a folk tale?
I mean, from a structural perspective, it's going to be in most of them, but not all of them. So, for example, The Fisherman and His Wife is a really well-known tale from the Grimms, but it also appears in like Russia and Japan and all over the place. And it shows people explicitly not learning their lessons and not maturing. In fact, they're already adults when the tale starts. So with that one, it's like And there's no clear moral to the story either, which always confounds people who think that all fairy tales have a definite moral lesson. So like, that would be one example. And then, like, with Little Red Riding Hood, she, like, depending on the version, she just, like, dies when she's a kid. So there are, like,
Did she?
lots of
Yeah,
counterexamples. So, like, yes, many fairy tales have these elements, but maybe not every single one.
that's a great answer. Oh, there's so many good ones here. Okay.
Hit us with
Heist Kill
another.
Kings sent us like a ton of questions, so I'm gonna be selective. For the moment, we might be able to get to some of the other ones later, but first, what makes a fairy tale different than a legend?
Yeah. So both are a narrative, both are telling a story, both may have supernatural elements. Fairy tales are explicitly fictional from the very start of the opening formula. Once upon a time, in a land far away, there was once a king and queen. So we're kind of in this like pseudo medieval imagined past where also there's magic. Um, so just in the orientation to reality, fairy tales are set aside as fiction, whereas legends, in theory, could have happened, like coordinating with whatever your belief system is. So, legends, they're a bit of an they're a bit fuzzy sometimes because there are ghost stories that could be legends or UFO alien abductions that could be legends. Not everyone believes in UFOs, so it's more that like legends have a sort of a tenuous relationship to reality where like they could maybe kind of be true, perhaps. But in fairy tales, like we know Cinderella was not a real person. We're really clear on that. Also, in terms of their story structure, a lot of fairy tales have this sort of wisdom maturation thing going on. Not all, but most fairy tales have a happy ending. Legends have unhappy endings for the most part, and her ghost still wanders the highways, or, the man with the hook is still out there kind of a thing, or, the woman took one bite of the Kentucky Fried Rat and she died kind of a thing. So they're just very different in terms of their structure.
The way I
Wait,
always oh, go
go
Daisy.
ahead. I was just thinking because like one thing, like I do a lot of legend stuff, so I'm not so much into the fairy tale universe, but in the legend universe, I didn't really think about like how often they do have like this ambiguously bad ending compared to a fairy tale, which has like an ambiguously good ending. Which is like, and then they're happily ever after, and the presumption is that everyone's good and fine and dandy. And with a legend, it's like, and this bad thing happened, and then that's it, or this like neutral weird thing happened and everyone's just weird about it and uncomfortable. Right.
So
So
the
interesting.
way I would always answer that in class, when I was asked like similar questions when I taught, I like you did in the beginning, Gina. Always go to belief first because I think it's a good way of contextualizing it. And I always say that like yeah, fairy tales happened once upon a time in a faraway land, and no one believes that like that is necessarily the truth. They just want to hear it because it's like entertaining. But no one says my friend's dad is a cop and he heard about tells the story of Snow White, and nobody in Germany says our earliest ancestor was Snow White, the real person who founded. Yeah, so everyone agrees that they are fiction, and no one's giving them that like historical past credit.
Hmm.
Uh, Daisy, we ready to switch gears? Or you think you got another one that needs to be answered right now?
Okay, I have one more that I think can be answered right now,
Do it.
and it's sort of a combo. I'm going to combine two questions into one from two different people because they're kind of similar. So one of them focuses on like the timeline of fairy tales. So the question is, how old does a story have to be considered a fairy tale? And then the other question is there a period of time where we can point to fairy tales like losing their gore or their scarier aspects? This is like reference to when we were talking about earlier of like the axes in The Wolf Among Us, or just some of these more like grotesque aspects. So they're kind of related in that sense. Like, what's the timeline for the fairy tale?
Hmm. Yeah, those are both really good questions. So, not all fairy tales are ridiculously ancient. Beauty and the Beast is clearly a version of Cupid and Psyche, which goes back to ancient Greek times. So there's that. But not all fairy tales are quite ancient. Plus, when they circulate as oral folklore, if nobody writes them down, how do we know? But I think that is one of the flaws of the tale type system, is it turns them into sort of like these really rigid artifacts. It's like, the corpse of a butterfly pinned to a board, where there might be new folktales and fairy tales arising in these kind of hybrid contexts. Like maybe some are arising in like orally told folklore, and some are emerging in kind of like newer media genres and whatever. But if we're going to be really kind of stodgy and say like there's no tale type number for that, then like we're not going to be able to study it as such. So again, like I do think there is a definition of fairy tales, and we should probably stick to it. But sometimes definitions can hold us back. Most things that we sort of canonically recognized as fairy tales really kind of cohered and crystallized in like the 16th and 17th and 18th centuries, when you had a lot going on in terms of like the ports of Europe were opening up again in like the Renaissance, and there was more cultural contact. Like we received a lot of information from the Middle East, North Africa, that was lost in the Dark Ages. I know this is kind of an oversimplification, but included an infusion of tales that were kept alive and told and so on, and existed in manuscripts. As well, we think there's an influence of tales from ancient India and different parts of China that probably came across the Silk Road. So like the history of fairy tales is long and varied. Some have ancient roots and some are more like early modern-ish. So that's, again, like you can point to a lot of fairy tales having existed from 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, which again takes us to this turn where it wasn't that fairy tales that the Grimms collected and then edited were completely stripped of gore. They took out the sex but left the violence, because like children's literature was just kind of forming at the time. And there were all these really gross kids books like Slovenly Peter, which was a German children's book at the time when the Grimms were sort of active, about like kids getting like their fingers chopped off and getting tossed into fires for being bad children. Like violence was seen as an acceptable way to teach kids what to do and what not to do. Sex was not. So the Grimms took out in an early version of Rapunzel that the Grimms collected. So she's in the tower with the witch Mother Gothel, and then the prince starts to visit her, and then like she says, "Mother Gothel, why don't my clothes fit anymore?" Implying that she's like pregnant. Like not a lot of sex education in the tower apparently. And the Grimms are like, "Oh no, that's too racy. We have to take that out." But they still leave it in. Like instead, like she hauls up the witch and she's like, "Oh, you're so much heavier than the prince." Oops. So they give her like a dumb blonde moment. And then she's still kicked out of the tower. And the prince is kicked out after her. And like he flings himself from the tower in despair because his lover's gone, and like the thorns blind him. It's the whole thing. And he finds her wandering in the desert. She's given birth to his two babies. Like she's given birth to twins. So like they leave the pregnancy in, but they take out any reference to it before that. So again, like the sanitization of fairy tales happens sort of unevenly over time, and the Grimms definitely played a role in it, more taking out the sex than the violence. And then I think the violence was just kind of toned down later as like children's literature began to kind of form as a genre, and different, especially Victorian era expectations for what was going to be this very almost romantic era sort of idealization of childhood as a time of innocence really kind of took root culturally.
Mm-hmm. That's so interesting.
Okay, like
because it's all stuff all stuff I knew about disparately, but never heard it put together like that. And I'm just sitting there like, oh yeah, all those things were in the air.
Blonde my new favorite tale type? I don't know. I'm just thinking, Jeana, have you ever been on TikTok lately and seen all of the like bimbo talks?
Oh yeah.
I have things to send you because.
Oh my god, yeah, bimbo
so
TikTok is enlightened. It's a lot. Yeah.
They're all. It is enlightened. It's all like leans super hard into like dumb blonde bimbo TikTok, but they're all anti-fascist, like activists, like all my girls, gays, and theys like represent. Like if I get on the wrong side of TikTok, I will kick you with my 7-inch heels. It's so good. Anyways,
yeah.
I'll send you some videos. I'm just thinking because you mentioned the blonde archetype is almost
who's the
part of fairy tale in some degree.
Who's the CEO of Bimbo TikTok? What's her name? Chrissy? Is it Chrissy?
Yes, and
I'm
I'll
just
plug
like
I'll
hearing
plug
her
a
voice. I'm just
stick up
hearing
in
her
the
voice
chat.
talk about like the Brothers Grimm's edits to Rapunzel,
Oh
just
my
being
god.
like, "I had a dumb blonde moment. Was that my fault? No, they didn't want to address my
No.
pregnancy." Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you have another? Did you have another too?
I think if we're ready, we're good to go. The other ones are so good. Like it's all about queering fairy tales, and I
Ooh.
think that we can get into the heat after we do the activity because this is like the stuff that I'm living for.
So you wanna go to the activity right now?
Yeah, let's do a quick activity.
Okay, so last week with Christina, we did a tier maker, and we don't have a tier maker this week, but we have more of an XY axis. So here is the characters that Jeana writes about alignment chart, where the XY axis is going to go from princess to witch and from trickster to magical helper, and the Folkwise research team has scoured your CV in order to come up with archetypal figures for you to plot somewhere along this XY axis to tell us where they fit. I think since he's already come up, we gotta start here, Jack, and we got the this should be the emote, but we got trickster Joe Biden. Where would you put Joe Biden on the scale from trickster to helper and from princess to witch?
Okay, definitely all the way on the trickster end of the spectrum, and
Oh,
then I'm gonna say halfway up to princess
like
because
here?
yeah,
Got it.
because of his affinity. So there are a lot of memes where he like dresses as the Easter Bunny, or he wants Santa Claus to come to the White House. So to me, that speaks of sort of a youthful form of innocence.
Okay. I like that explanation. Up next, we have the girl with no hands who you mentioned earlier. Where are we putting her?
Well, this one's complicated because when she eventually gets married to a king, and then he has to go away to war, and she's pregnant, either like the king's mother doesn't like her, or the devil's like switching out the letters between the household and the king where he's traveling, and she's accused of being a witch, or she's
Mm,
accused of giving birth to a changeling, or she's accused of giving birth to like a litter of puppies, which like implies bestiality,
yeah,
obviously, which is not great. So like she's accused of being a witch, but she becomes a princess through marriage. But like that one doesn't really like resolve well, in my opinion.
sure.
So um she has magical help. She's not much of a trickster. So I mean I'd kind of almost put her like square in like the crosshairs.
Oh, she's
A
dead
little a
center.
little up. A little up, like a
Li-
little towards princess.
little towards
Okay.
like to here, flush with the line.
Yeah.
Cool. Next we have the amphibious man from Shape of Water. Where would you put our fish man from the Shape of Water?
Well, see, this one's complicated too because he requires rescue in the film, which puts him in the structural role of princess if
Mm-hmm.
you follow Vladimir Prop's morphology of the folktale. But at the same time, he has magical healing powers because he's whatever he is. So that would put him more towards the witch end and towards the magic helper end. Yeah, I don't think he's sly enough to be a trickster. So I guess just kind of put him down. Yeah,
Here?
yeah.
Kind of okay. Great. Next, because we really scoured the CV, here we have Sir Integra Fairbook Wingate's Helsing from the anime Helsing. Where are you putting Sir Integra Helsing?
Ooh, I'd say put him to the very like bottom corner of trickster and witch.
Trickster and
Actually,
Witch.
like yes, kind of a magic helper. He turns the police girl into a vampire, but he just has his own agenda.
Gotcha.
Just so you all
Frankenstein's.
know, I got a quick just so you all know I haven't seen this before at all, and I put myself on mute in the background because I am cracking up hysterically. And I don't want to interrupt the great answers that you're giving, but I don't know if it's because like I just haven't seen this before and it's so hysterical. Keep on going. I love this.
Oh, that's it's worth it just to hear you unmute yourself. Where do you want to put Frankenstein's monster?
Okay, so I'm working on a piece with a colleague, Jude Wright, and friend who it's not published yet, about Frankenstein as a literary incel character. And there's
Oh,
no incel axis here, is there? So,
that's the
um,
z-axis. It's not on this chart. Yeah, from Chad to Virgin is not on this chart now.
so I'm struggling. Um,
Can I say we did debate feminist and misogynist as like two different axes. We didn't go with that, but that was thrown in the mix at one point.
I'm gonna have to put Frankenstein's creature towards the trickster end,
Hmm.
and also a bit towards the witch end. So like just yeah, let's yeah,
Maybe like
right there
here.
is good because
Good.
he's universally loathed like witches are or were in various cultures. And the trickster thing is again like kind of a boundary crosser, transgression. That is kind of the whole point of the creature is transgressing the boundaries between life and death and
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Good answer. Next is we joked about perhaps your most cited article or blog post, Joseph Campbell. Where are we putting Joseph Campbell on this scale?
Well, hmm. I guess kind of on the magic helper side of things because in a weird way, Campbell has helped get people interested in folklore, even if his ideas are very inaccurate for the most part. So yeah,
It's
let's just
fair.
do that. That's good enough. Yeah,
But right here between Princess and Witch.
yeah,
Cool. And less magic than Shape of Water.
definitely.
Okay. Next we've got Echo from Dollhouse, which I think you've written about a couple times. Uh,
Yeah, one is in press, but yeah.
where are we? Where are we putting her?
So I'd say she's definitely more on the trickster side of things.
Mm-hmm.
And as far again, like princess or witch, like it kind of depends on which season of Dollhouse we're talking
Oh, that's
about
true.
because season one, she's more princess because there's a whole Briar Rose episode. She needs to be rescued, at least in Ballard's mind, it's very a white knight thing going
Mm-hmm.
on. But as the series progresses, we see I think she's more witch because she's sort of she knows more than she should.
Yeah.
Um, I don't want to give too many spoilers. I guess it's an old show, so it doesn't really matter. But yeah, I'd say yeah, let's leave her there. I like
Full
that.
trickster between witch and princess. I like that. And then we've got Bo from Lost Girl. Where should we put her last?
Put her in my heart. um Yeah, so again, like she is technically a fairy princess. Again, sorry, spoilers. But she is also a warrior, and she's not the witchiest of the series, I guess. Um, I'd say she's definitely more trickster than magic helper because she upends a lot of social structures in the Fae world.
Hmm.
Or really between the worlds, if you want to get deep about it. But yeah, so I'd say put her above Frankenstein.
Above Frankenstein, right? Like right here?
Yeah, right there.
Great. How does your alignment chart look?
I think this is great, and I also think I learned a very valuable lesson that when you said we're going to do an activity and my heart froze in fear, that must be how my students feel all the time.
I think Christina said
Oh,
the same thing last week. And I will say the same thing I said to her. I was that freak who loved group work in school. So uh it's my problem, not yours. Oh yeah, and someone is pointing out Biden is the most princess, or at least tied for being the most princess.
Well, what does that tell you
I
about my
do love
fellowship?
that.
All
I
right.
love that so much. I have been absolutely
Daisy, you okay?
laughing hysterically in the chat. I think I'm fine. I've had some water. I think I'm fine. But this was hysterical, and I appreciate so much this alignment chart. It's very good.
Make sure to like take a picture or a screenshot of it because I need a copy of
Oh
this.
yeah, it'll be
Oh, definitely. Yeah, we
it'll
were
be
thinking
it'll
of
be
maybe
saved. It'll be
posting it on
saved.
Instagram or something later on. Yeah, when we do the highlight reel. update for the final edited version of this. Yeah, it's very good.
What is it?
We'll send it to you too. You can use it in your class. It'll be great. Kara Becca says Biden would 100% love to play Pretty Pretty Princess. Freaking remember Pretty Pretty Princess, and we lost like all of the pieces to it. But that was a really fun game.
Oh, I
Did
played a Pretty
Pretty Princess?
Yeah, my brother is a pro at Pretty Pretty Princess with my niece. Yeah.
Yes, that was such a fun game. I almost forgot about that. Kara Becca, thank you for bringing that back. That was a good game.
All right, it is saved.
Okay.
We've got that saved.
Dang,
So,
well, send us your questions if you've got more questions based on those answers. Send them to folkwise13@gmail.com. You can post them in the chat. I've got a bunch of questions for you that are really fun if you're interested in doing more questions.
Here for it.
go for it.
Okay, cool. Oh dang. Okay, so this is
hold on, Daisy.
yes.
Next time we're all in person, we're playing Pretty Pretty Princess. We're doing a bracket. That is just that's been said in the chat.
Oh,
I'm ready for this. I'm gonna have the
Oh my
best
God.
earrings.
oh, this will be so good. We can like bring custom pieces. That would be fun.
Incredible.
Okay, that's so good. All of the leftover jewelry and jewelry boxes that nobody ever wears that like is just there for some reason. Let's
Yeah.
bring all that. That will be the fun Pretty Pretty Princess stuff. Provided they're not heirlooms, which I know sometimes they are. Okay. All right. What fairy tale? This is asked by Luomi, who has sent us a bunch of questions that are very good. What fairy tale right now needs to be adapted into a kids movie?
Ooh.
If you could choose a fairy tale right now, the modern day needs a fairy tale kids movie adaptation, what fairy tale would it be?
Yeah, it's tail type 514 star, the shift of sex that my friend and colleague Psyche Reddy is working on. So it starts out like Mulan, where this girl is cross-dressing as a guy, and then usually gets to the kingdom and really impresses the king so much that the king is like, all right, you can marry my daughter. And she's like, okay. And again, depending on the version, because there's a lot of variants running around. In some cases, the princess is like, cool, I'm good with this. And in others, she's like, father, my wedding bed is not what it was supposed to be. Hint, hint. And like she basically makes the king send away the new husband on all these really dangerous quests, hoping to get him killed off. And but this young person is just so clever and brave that they outsmart now with everything. And the last thing they do is like they basically carry off a heist. So okay, so first off, this gets to be a heist film. So
Okay.
they carry off a heist by like stealing something from the ogre or the witch or whatever. And as this supernatural critter is watching the human get away with their treasure, they curse them and they say, if you be man, be now woman. If you be woman, be now man. And suddenly you have a magical sex change. And the young man goes home to his bride, who's like, all right, I'm good. We can call off the dangerous quests. And they lived happily ever after.
Cool.
Like this one is like, this is legit in
it.
oral tradition.
That's awesome.
I
yeah.
need it.
I can already hear the montage set to Dancing with Myself.
Yes. That would be so fun. That would have to be like the next cultural impact children's like fairy tale-esque film would like that Shrek had. That would be this with all the pop culture references. That would be like Dancing with Myself. Yeah, like there'd be a lot of Prince involved. That would be very fun. I love that. Okay, I have more for you.
Great.
Okay. I might be missing the acronym, but can we talk about fairy tales, queerness, and HCA?
Hans Christian Andersen. Yes.
Hans Christian Andersen, I think, is yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't want to assume too fully, but I'm pretty sure. Yeah. So queerness, fairy tales, and Hans Christian Andersen. What does that look like? First of all, who is Hans Christian Andersen for those who don't know? And then queerness and fairy tales represented in those.
Yeah, so he was a Danish author, really prolific during the mid to late 1800s. And he was also very full of himself. So he wrote like 2 or 3 memoirs and autobiographies, and each one is kind of more fantastical than the last. He did become famous. He did travel all around the various courts of Europe to stay with noblemen and things like that. He actually visited Charles Dickens, and Anderson's English apparently was not so good, so he was kind of like an unwelcome house guest, and Dickens was being very British and being like, "Well, that was a lovely stay," and Anderson was like, "Uh-huh." So apparently he was just like a fanboy who stalked Dickens as well.
Huh.
But we know from his correspondences that he never married. I think there was a brief engagement that was called off. And so there's some speculation, would we classify Anderson perhaps as gay or as bisexual, maybe asexual, because he wrote letters to his sort of adopted brother. So he grew up in extreme poverty, which, like 19th century Denmark had a lot of that, unfortunately. And so he's the son of like a washerwoman and something else. And his parents were illiterate. And so he was lucky in that a nobleman sort of paid for him to get a good education. And so this was sort of his adopted father figure. And so his sort of adopted brother figure, he wrote these letters to. And like Anderson was like, I think of your eyes like those of a dark Calabrian girl. And like all so you're just like,
Wow.
that's a little racy. So, there's some speculation that, again, Anderson was maybe gay or maybe bisexual, but we don't really know for sure. It is sort of easy to look at tales like The Little Mermaid, where she is desperately yearning to be a part of a world that just cannot accept her in her natural state. Was this about class conflict and class consciousness? Is this about having feelings for somebody who doesn't share your sexual orientation? Like, we don't really know. But yeah, there is a definite sort of vibe to Anderson that like he was kind of lonely and he was kind of socially awkward and kind of a reject in a lot of ways. So it's not entirely certain like, what his experience of it was, but a lot of this sort of like sadness and earnest longing to be accepted like did come through in his writing.
I had no idea.
Hey.
That's awesome.
That's so cool. I didn't actually know that about the author himself.
Yeah.
I know that like queerness in fairy tales is something that's been explored in a number of ways. The one that I can think of most commonly that like people share on Tumblr, for example, all the time back in the day when Tumblr was a big hot commodity, was like that Divine, the drag queen, was represented in Ursula in the Disney adaptation, right? And I wondered if like maybe there are some like older versions of the kind of like queerness represented. I've also heard a lot of like parallels between queerness and like trickster characters or like villains, right? Like ambiguously gendered characters, characters that aren't human or something like that. Maybe there's something there. Is this something that you've connected in your own work?
A little bit, yeah. So, I mean, fairy tales are notoriously heteronormative. There's just so much like boys do this and girls do that and do the right thing, get a monogamously wed heterosexual spouse. Yeah. So there is a whole lot of heteronormativity in fairy tales for sure. As far as the queer stuff, that tale about the girl who cross-dressed and then became a boy, that is one of the queerest, like explicitly queer content tale types that I know of.
Yeah.
For a lot of them, it's just kind of like hiding around the corners. Like it's just like sort of at the margins of the text, like not super obvious. There's a handful of similar tale types, but there's not a lot of them. So yeah, it becomes like, how are you looking at the tales? For instance, in some of my work on tale type 451, The Maiden Who Seeks Her Brothers, I see the maiden Silence as very queer because her brothers are birds. She usually has to undertake a period of not speaking for like 7 years or something to disenchant them.
Mhm.
And during that time, a king like marries her, and like she can't give verbal consent. So I don't know. Guess it's okay. But I see her Silence as queer and sort of a refusal because she cannot be a good sister and wife and mother, because when she has babies, the king's mother, who's evil, steals them away and like pretends that they're dead. So there's almost this refusal to do conventional femininity in a way that will please everyone, and she suffers for it. She's about to be burned at the stake when her brothers swoop in and turn into humans and save her. So again, it's not like explicitly queer in terms of like same gender attraction or in terms of a non-gender conforming identity right then, but I think that it sort of gives the middle finger to conventional femininity in a lot of ways, and I find that very queer.
Oh, have you ever read The Flowers in the Attic?
I feel like that was so many years ago, I don't remember it.
I know, it's like an old book. Oh man, does somebody in the chat remember what the author's name is? I'll look it up really
Mm,
quick.
mm.
Um, the reason I remember is VC Andrews. That's the author. The reason I remember it made me think of that is because the entire perspective of the story is of like um children who were kind of abandoned by their mom who like just leaves them in an attic to like pursue her life without them because it's more exciting, basically. I mean, like that's a really like very summarized version of the
And
story, but
and then some
it's
other
in that
things
same way
happen.
of like,
Yeah.
yeah, a lot of other things happen too. But it just reminds me of that kind of like queering like what it means to be a woman, I guess, like
Mm,
or feminine even, which is kind of interesting. Anyway,
Mm.
I've got more questions for you.
Do it.
This is all very good. Speaking of cross-dressing, we have a question about that too, kind of. Luomi also asked, because you mentioned cross-dressing even earlier in the stream too, beyond just this moment when we kind of circled back to it. It'd be easy to read that in queer contexts, but is that just an unhelpful projection of a tripe that's not meant to signify queerness? I guess like how is it being read is sort of my interpretation of that question. Like, is it is it too easy to read it into queerness, or is it like an unhelpful projection?
Yeah, no, that's always a valid question because cultural context is everything. So, at the time when Madame Danois was writing Belle Belle about her, cross-dressing Mulan-like protagonist, like what were people wearing in the court of Louis XIV? Like
mm.
men would be wearing what we would think of as feminine attire. So, a cultural context is really gonna vary and inflect that question differently. But yeah, I think that for a lot of contemporary American people, there is this automatic conflation of cross dressing with gender and sexuality things when it's really just like you're either wearing or not wearing a thing that doesn't tell me anything about your identity. But because cross dressing was for so long pathologized and medicalized as like it being an invert, which is an early term for someone who's gay or being like a homosexual or whatever. So I feel like there's all these kind of weird conflations that are part of Western intellectual medical history and like scientific history, as much as it's not scientific. So I do feel like these things can get conflated and it can be easy for us to project. Um, and it would really depend, when you're looking at a tale from a given cultural context, like how do they think of gender roles? It might be different than how we think of gender roles. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just
That was
want
a
to say,
great
chat,
answer.
these have all been such great questions this week.
I know. I like there's even other good questions too. Gina, I don't know if it's your energy bringing it into the chat or the people love you or what, but like these are really good questions.
I mean,
And I
it
feel
is
like
it is past
this
11. If you need to like sleep and stuff, you are free to go whenever. All right, that is the hand.
yes.
That's the hand I like to see. Yeah, keep going.
Okay. I have two more questions for you as of this moment. I could get more in the chat, but as of this moment I have two more questions for you. And one of them, this might be a quicker answer for you, but the question is, what is the most recent fairy tale? And that might be a complicated answer to a straightforward question.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah, again, if you just rely on the tail type index to say like these are the fairy tales that exist, it can be a little too rigid. So I don't really know if I know the answer to that one. I mean, I think that people are telling and retelling fairy tales constantly, and there's always going to be some kind of gradient where one version kind of shades into another, and then like, what really is the difference between Sleeping Beauty and Snow White? Because they both feature like deathly slumbering maidens. Like so at a certain point you're like, well, what's the difference between anything anymore? Like let's just like can that one to the philosophers and go home. Like I
I think that's a great answer
That's probably
because I was
fair.
thinking about yeah, like I was thinking the same thing with that question is like, you know, they change over time. And that's one of the biggest things that folklorists I think look at when they study folklore is this kind of like the similarities and differences that different pieces of our culture like change and stay the same over time, right? And I think that this question kind of gets at that point where like you have to see them as constantly changing to understand, I think, what the fairy tale is.
Mhm.
And so to see them as like a new fairy tale is sort of like it's not really new, it's like the same thing with a
Mm.
different, packaging, right?
Mhm.
There's
Yeah.
a the what's like I don't remember this. I'm pretty sure I heard it in the context of describing the Game of Thrones universe of like science fiction and fantasy being the same genre but with different same genre in a house, like the house is the genre and the furniture is different. So like
Mm.
you're kind of leaning into the same genre of like escapism. It's another world, it's another expression of a world, and then all the furniture looks different. So for science fiction, it might be something that's based in the future. It might be very based in materialist science, Western science. Yeah, speculative fiction I see in the chat coming up,
Mhm.
where fantasy might be placed more in like a quote unquote natural world. There might be something like magic,
Mm.
and we can debate about like where these boundaries cross or whatever, but I think fairy tale is similar where like it's kind of like always under the house of fairy tale, but the furniture inside the house might be different. Does that resonate with you at all, Gina?
Kind of, yeah, and I also read a lot of sci-fi and fantasy, so I'm with you on like there are a lot of like core similarities to those genres, even if the window dressing is different. But yeah, with fairy
Yeah.
tale, like what's the newest fairy tale? Well, let me see, like what's the most recent published fairy tale retelling, or what's the most recent video game that does it, or
Sure.
TV show, or yeah, there's a million ways that fairy tales manifest in pop culture. I know I've seen some work by my colleagues and friends, Brittany Warman and Sarah Cleto, who run the Carter Haas School of
Hmm.
Folklore and the Fantastic. And they're always bringing to the table various examples of like, and this retelling and that retelling, and we just published this poem. And so again, like they're constantly out there being remodeled to suit our needs.
Do you find that our needs change that much over time, or when you look at fairy tales, like the needs or like the things that the function of fairy tale, like does it fit a different need or is it the same need that just keeps recurring?
I mean, on the one hand, there are a lot of case studies showing a lot of differences. So, going back to the time of Louis the 14th, especially in the 1690s, when a lot of French women and then like Charles Perrault were writing fairy tales, they were able to get away with really sophisticated political critique
Mm.
because fairy tales were seen as kind of trivial. Like, oh, well, I'll read this out loud in my salon alongside someone else's poem, and it's kind of whatever, we're just kind of chatting kind of a thing. So they were talking about things like, well, what if society was a matriarchy? Because there's this one fantasy island place where like you only have queens. Like, how does that happen? So like on the one hand, you saw fairy tales providing the function of an outlet to have sophisticated political commentary in a way that wouldn't get you yanked before Louis the 14th. And so we don't see that same function today because so many people think fairy tales are just for kids and they don't know this long history. But at the same time, so like that's one like case study of showing different functions. But then at the same time, I think fairy tales are about a lot of core human experiences and emotions, like just like having a family and losing a family. Like how many fairy tale kids start out as orphans and things like that. Or I was just talking to my students about this past week, in the last week or so. That Cinderella could be seen as a tale about bullying in the household. And are we dealing with
Mm.
cyberbullying today? Why, yes, we are. So there are going to be a lot of similarities and a lot of constants, even as there are, again, it comes down to tradition and variation. A lot of things stay the same and a lot of things change.
That's a great answer to that question.
You asked a
This
good
is so
follow up.
great.
You set yourself up.
I
I don't
guess
know what to
yeah,
tell you.
I guess that's true. I just feel like this entire like time spent with Eugenia has been like a lecture. This is so cool. I've learned so much. I
Hey,
love this
and we gotta
because so
follow.
much
We
so
gotta
many.
follow Chris Britt 22, who I saw in the chat earlier.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, our this is so great because like so much of my coursework right now as a PhD student in comparative studies focusing on environmental storytelling and folklore doesn't get a ton of uh fairy tale
Neighbor.
action. So it's nice to get like Yeah, new guy. It's nice to get like some of this other sort of like folklore analysis from a different genre than I'm used to hearing all the time too. So this is like so cool. And I'm sure
Awesome.
that the chat's not used to hearing. So I feel like this is great.
A couple people in the
Okay,
chat have been talking about how it's informative to hear someone just like break it down like this. So I think the chat is appreciating you taking the time
yeah.
to go into well, go into into detail on something that's I don't know, like so familiar. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And also so what people connect with folklore when they hear the term folklore, right? Like I
Oh,
think that that's
sure.
another thing too where like our audience, like we are connecting it as folkwise with video games, but that's not what most people are connecting the term folklore with, right? Like they're right now they're
Mhm.
connecting it with Taylor Swift, but they're also connecting it with folklore and they're connecting it with like magic and these other kinds of like genres that I think don't quite get at this sort of like these theoretical approaches, like these queer approaches or these feminist approaches or these like larger humanities approaches, like, and I think that you're kind of bringing that all together really well for people who are kind of asking those questions, and that's awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah. I there's a question in the chat on the same subject of like queerness and folklore
Hmm.
that I'll get to, and then I have another question that we got sent in that's slightly different. Um, So the question from Shirley, you can't be one of our mods. Thank you so much for asking this question. Couldn't the rise of queer retellings of fairy tales also point to the idea of societal needs changing?
Yeah. I definitely like that take on it. Yeah, so obviously, gosh, I want to say a lot about this. Okay.
Yeah.
So in my experience and in my research, kind of it's one of those things where the only constant is change. So people who
Mm.
are gender nonconforming or sexually diverse, we've always existed in every human society. And you look at nature, like nature is like full of things that might strike people as deviant. So like it is very human to be gender and sexual types of diversity. Like it's just how we are. But different societies parse it really differently. Like in some societies, same gender attraction is more like cool, cool, but gender nonconforming is you're like we look down on that, and there's various mixes of things. So it's just very diverse. So kind of what I see looking at this from like a Western fairy tale lens is that there's been obviously a lot of censorship and oppression of queer identities for the past I don't know how many centuries or whatever. So now that we are in a stage where like kind of post civil rights movement, a lot of LGBTQ rights and stuff. Like first off, you can even publish this stuff without horrible consequences. Like you look at things like the Hays Code
Yeah.
dominating the motion pictures in America for how many decades. So first off, like some of this is just going to be changing cultural conditions that make it a possibility. I mean, obviously there have always been various queer subcultures that were underground here and there and so on. But yeah, the fact that we can get mainstream fairy tale retellings that are queer, I think it does speak to both the conditions that allow such a thing to be mainstream, as well as a desire to see more of these identities reflected in the media that we consume. And I'm really enjoying being able to read this. Like I also, like I mentioned, I read a lot of sci-fi and fantasy. Like I'm just reading lesbian sword and sorcery and space opera left and right, and I love it. It's so great. Like I'm actually going to be writing an essay for an online publication about that. Because it's like, give me lesbians or give me death, because like half of them are necromancers, and I'm like, yes.
Oh my god. Okay, first off, I'm like, can we have you on when we talk about Castlevania and how much both Dom and I love Castlevania? Number one, lesbian vampires, let's go.
Ooh.
Number
Yes. The
two,
lesbian vampire
number
army on
two,
Castlevania.
yeah, we gotta have you on when we talk about cryptids because I have this whole thing about the queerness of cryptids and like the liminal
Hmm.
space that being queer occupies in society and how the queerness of cryptids latched onto each other because of their like perseverance and their like isolation but networking through their kind of like cryptid or hidden status, and like we need to have you on for that too because
I can see it.
I think that all of this fits right into it. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yes, Shirley says, "Let's go lesbians." Yes, let's do
Let's
this.
go.
In case you didn't know before, yeah, this chat's incredibly queer, so be there, be square, I guess I gotta say. Okay, so another question, which is like kind of a different turn, but it's still a very interesting question for fairy tales from Pies Kill Kings, who sent us so many questions. Thank you so much, James and Lydia. Um, would you say any religious stories qualify as fairy tales? Also, if at least one person in the story sees that magic is not real, is it still a fairy tale? Maybe those are two questions.
Yeah, okay, let
We
me
can
take
break them up.
first one first. I mean, need a
Yeah.
reminder for the
Yeah.
second one.
Well, sounds
So
good.
the religious thing gets complicated. So my mentor back at Berkeley, Alan Dundas, wrote a book called Holy Writ as Oral Lit, the Bible as Folklore,
Mm-hmm.
and he got death threats.
Mm-hmm.
So it is a controversial topic. And so his take was that many of the stories that appear in the Bible, particularly the Old Testament, are basically folk tales that were circulating in the Near East at the time, and they happened to get written down and have a very specific spin put on them.
Mm-hmm.
So talking about folktale and religion in the same breath, it has been done. The interesting thing about a lot of European fairy tales is, if you look structurally, many fairy tales, they have, sort of like testing the protagonist and a reward and maybe some magic, stuff like that. So this donor figure who kind of fills that slot of now I test you, could be anyone. So in a lot of European folktales, like a saint will come down and
Yeah.
do the thing. Or like in The Maiden Without Hands from the Grimms, like the devil is the antagonist. So you get a lot of these religious figures filling what we might call a motifemic slot, if you want to be fancy with our terminology.
Ooh.
And so again, like I think it's just a reflection of the sort of cultural context in which these stories are being told and needing a suitable person to fill that structural slot, I think. So fairy tales are they're not super religious in my opinion. Again, they can have some of those connections, they can have some of those overlap points. But fairy tales are kind of amoral. They're kind of might makes right a lot of the time.
Sure.
And that's not always a great moral message. It kind of depends on what you believe, I guess. But I see that, they can sometimes be coextensive, but they wouldn't overlap as much as some other genre like myth and religion obviously overlap.
Yeah.
Saints legends obviously overlap a lot. So that's kind of my brief take on that. And what was the second question?
The second question I have, that first of all, that was a great answer to the intersection between religion and fairy tales there.
Mm-hmm.
But the second question is, if at least one person in the story sees that the magic is not real, is it still a fairy tale? And maybe this is like a question connected to kind of like legend, but if a person, yeah, so like if the character or person represented in the story is self-aware, like do they see that the magic is quote unquote not real, does it count as a fairy tale still? This is maybe a genre
Yeah,
question.
we don't see that in fairy tales very often. Fairy tales tend to be what Luti describes as one-dimensional,
Mm.
not like lacking depth as a human, though that's also a fairy tale thing, but more like our dimension, like the human realm, is kind of coextensive with like heaven and hell and the spirit world. So like if you're walking down a fairy tale road and someone's like, I have popped up from the underworld to give you some gold, you're like, okay, cool, bro. Like you're like, yeah. So fairy tale characters don't tend to show shock or awe or terror at these kinds of things. They're just kind of like, or one of my favorite ones is the Virgin Mary's Child in the Grimm's collection, where this little girl is orphaned and the Virgin Mary brings her up to heaven to give her good life. It says, "Don't look in that one room." She looks in that one room. She sees like golden baby Jesus or something, and then the Virgin Mary is like, "I'm gonna sew your lips shut so that you can't talk and cast you out on earth to live in the forest among the wild beasts." Which is kind of intense, and there's a whole
Oh
like
my god.
this whole testing thing, and she's eventually redeemed and married and babies and stuff like that. But it's just this whole like nobody blinks an eye. Nobody's like, holy crap, did that just happen? That's just not really a genre feature of fairy tales. Maybe some that I'm not aware of. I mean, sometimes someone will encounter something miraculous, like there are a bunch of magical objects, like a magic tablecloth that if you like open it up, it's full of food immediately. So sometimes people are like, "No, you don't have that," and then the guy's like, "Yeah, I do. Come eat with me." And
How
then
do
they're
you
like, "Okay."
explain this?
So you do get like a couple of small moments, but they're not seen too much in the genre.
Wow, this is like so fascinating. Um Thank you so much for being a guest on our show. Those are all of the questions I have at the moment. Uh, yeah, that's all the chat questions that I have.
Thank you so much to the chat for asking.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, chat,
Thank
you asked
you.
wonderful questions this week. Thank you, Jeana, for answering them
Yeah.
so well. And
Chat
yeah,
went
thanks for all the feedback in chat. I think everyone was really, from what I could tell from the people who were speaking up, they were really liking it, and I think we had some good Q's and some good A's, and I want to say thanks to everyone.
Great. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, we honestly come back.
Yes, come back.
Anytime you want to be on the show, come back, because the questions and answers, like, this was amazing. You were a great guest to have. I think that people learn something from this stream, which is really like the goal at the end of the day. People learn something about folklore, and we so appreciate it. Easy peasy. Sorry for our technical difficulties earlier, everybody who was there for that. But otherwise, I think this was a great chat.
Jeana, do you have anything you want to plug?
Yeah. Do you want to let us hype you up?
I'm just doing my thing.
Doing your thing.
Okay,
Follow the blog. You got the chapter. The new chapter came out in the Folklore and social media.
Oh yeah, just this one.
Oh, there it is, still in front. And
yeah, just so you know, I have been posting your Foxy Folklorist periodically in the background.
Yep, in the chat.
Oh.
And pickle beets and vodka.
Yep.
We're plugging that.
Oh, I think we did get a another possible name for that from Carabecca.
What?
Let me find it real quick. It was really good.
You can click on Carabecca. You can click on Carabecca, and then click messages.
You're blowing my mind right now.
Beauty in the Borscht. Oh,
yes,
that's really good.
That might win. They might win.
All right, I think Beauty in the Borscht. I might say Beauty in the Borscht is the winner too. That's very good. Oh, all right. We're not gonna top that. So, Jeana, thank you very much for playing Wolf Among Us with us, teaching us about all the different tale types and references that were showing up, and then answering everyone's great questions. You've been a wonderful guest.
Thanks so much for having me.
Oh my gosh, anytime. And you were absolutely getting all of the references that were going over my head for sure in Wolf Among Us. Feel free, if we play it again, maybe we'll recruit you to play again for another time, because it was just so good. Having somebody who's so entrenched in fairy tales pick up on all of the subtleties in the game is just really special, because not everybody gets that on their playthroughs of any kind of Fable games.
We'll work with your schedule, but I definitely want to see a part 2.
I would love that.
Cool.